My mother-in-law started staying overnight. My wife did not pay attention to this. She likes to communicate with her mother. But it annoyed me because I am the master in the house and I don't like it when strangers walk around the rooms in their clothes. I talked to my wife, but she sided with my mom. No amount of persuasion helped, and I began to think about what I could do to scare my mother-in-law away from our house. I did not dare to talk to her frankly because she helps with the grandchildren. So I decided to show my dignity, to show that I was home and could go out as I wanted. I waited until everyone fell asleep. My wife falls asleep literally in 5 minutes. She is very tired at work and lurked in the room. At that moment, my mother-in-law went to the bathroom. I got out of bed and froze in the hallway. I could hear the water running down. The door creaked open and I stood on the threshold. I pretended I wanted to go to the bathroom too. My mother-in-law looked down and was stunned. She saw me in all my splendor, so to speak. I stood there yawning, pretending not to understand her displeasure. I apologized, mumbling that I hadn't expected her visit to the bathroom at this hour. My mother-in-law looked embarrassed and hurried to her room. I turned around and gave her a glance. She has a good physique, I pondered. To be honest, it took me by surprise. I turned around and headed towards my wife. When morning came, my mother-in-law was gone. She had gone to her house. I have to admit, I was relieved. Had my decision really worked? However, my joy had no limit. In the evening, the doorbell rang again. I went to open it, and on the threshold stood my mother-in-law. "Hello, son-in-law. Do not stand still. Let me through. I'm coming to your place for a sleepover." My jaw dropped. I realized that my efforts were in vain. I had been waiting for her at night, wanting to scare her. But nothing was working on her. So I started thinking again, trying to come up with a new plan. What if I cornered my mother-in-law? Maybe she'd get scared and refuse to stay the night. Easier said than done. The day came to an end and everyone went to their rooms. My wife, as usual, fell into a deep slumber. The children fiddled in their cribs for a while longer, but eventually fell asleep after a day of running around. I listened to the sounds and rustles in the apartment and finally heard the floor creak. My mother-in-law likes to walk around at night. It's a bad habit. No matter how many times we told her off, she never understood. And here I go again. I turn around, and I see that my mother-in-law has changed her clothes. Last time it was a long shirt without slits, and this time, a short seductive nightie with a slit on the chest. I realized she was trying for me. I walked over to her, wrapped both arms around her, and pulled her closer. To my surprise, my mother-in-law wrapped her arms around my neck and squeezed me tightly. I hadn't expected her to react this way, but my body reacted instinctively. I had intended to teach her a lesson and scare her away, but instead I had inadvertently piqued her interest. Upon realizing this, I almost laughed out loud. However, I must admit that I enjoyed the unexpected turn of events. Even though I am happy with my wife, a change of scenery in bed can refresh married life. Variety and new experiences are important, as long as they are discreet. After a quick chat with my mother-in-law, I slipped under the covers, gently stroked my wife's back, and made sure she was sound asleep. I didn't want my wife to find out my secret on the first day. In the morning, as every day, I went to the kitchen to have breakfast. My mother-in-law was already there, looking radiant and satisfied. She took the time to fix her hair and apply makeup, again trying only for her favorite son-in-law, her eyes shamelessly sparkling. We exchanged smiles, almost like partners in crime. I sat down at the table, and my mother-in-law placed a steaming pancake on my plate, sliding it toward me. "Bon appetit, dear son-in-law. Try my pancakes," she said warmly. I happily took to my breakfast, taking advantage of the fact that my wife wasn't around. I even managed to secretly pat my mother-in-law's ass. We drank tea peacefully. I refrained from pranks in the kitchen, realizing that now was not the time. I decided to save that for tonight. While I devoured the pancakes, my mother-in-law went off on some errands of her own. I grinned to myself, wondering what important things she might have to do besides tending to her flowers or gossiping with her neighbors on the bench. By late afternoon, I found myself feeling strangely at ease in her presence. It was a sharp contrast to my previous reactions. Indeed, man is an unusual creature. However, my wife came up with a witty solution. She sent her mother-in-law to spend the night at her house. She went up to her and said, "Mom, please don't take offense, but today is X day, and I'd like to be alone with my husband." My mother-in-law grudgingly agreed, gathered her things, and left the apartment, slamming the door behind her. I only shrugged my shoulders in response. Then my wife, with a serious look, asked me if I was satisfied. "Embarrassed," I replied. "Satisfied with what?" Then I realized what she meant. "Well, you mentioned that your mother-in-law was bothering you, so I decided to help you out." How could I have forgotten? I didn't tell my wife that things had drastically changed, and now I really wanted to spend more time with my mother-in-law, especially at night. I just smiled and left it at that. My wife twisted her finger at her temple, showing that she didn't understand anything. I told her that I didn't mind if my mother-in-law stayed, as I was sorry to have her home alone. My wife could not believe my words, but when she did, she was overjoyed. She hugged me tightly and thanked me profusely. I never understood why, but my wife explained that she saw me as an understanding and cultured man. I nodded in agreement and let her kiss me. Yes, that's right. Here's how my wife and I resolved the situation. We decided not to invite my mother-in-law to stay the night, but if she wanted to, we wouldn't object. Both women were willing to accommodate my desires in the bedroom, albeit at different times. It was a delicate balance, and I had the courage to enjoy both, but only in a certain order of priority. My wife, on the other hand, was exhausted and rarely let me near her. I took no offense. However, it would be a sin to complain. As the saying goes, I had a good life as it was. After my wife kicked out her mother, my mother-in-law did not come for 3 days. I remember, I even thought, to hell with her. We don't need her. My wife is more than enough. But no, on the 3rd day, mother-in-law appeared, and my wife apologized for her harshness. Mother-in-law accepted the apology. It turned out that she was not offended by it, which is always a positive thing. But that's not all. The mother-in-law turned out to be pretty sharp in this situation. If it weren't for her slightly aged face, I wouldn't have guessed she was over 50. I would have thought she was no more than 30. She was so energetic and mischievous. I don't know what she thought of me, but I think she was thrilled. It was more than just an adventure for her. She even told me that her health had improved because of me, that she had lost at least 10 years. I have no regrets whatsoever. As they say, I'm glad I tried it. My mother-in-law behaved adequately so that my daughter would not tire of her. She stayed overnight a couple times a week. That was enough. There was no hurry. Better to savor the pleasure for months than to get it all at once and forget. One Saturday night, the phone rang and my wife picked it up. After talking for about a minute, she said that her mother was waiting for me in the park to help her fix her broken bicycle. I wondered since when my mother-in-law rode a bicycle. She used to ride it occasionally, but that was a long time ago. My wife was surprised too, but I knew my mother-in-law was up to something to get me out of the house. She must really want something. I reached the park in 10 minutes, quickly got dressed, smiled, and felt that there was an interesting game waiting for me among the trees. But let's see what would come out of it. When I arrived at the park, my mother-in-law was sitting on a bench, and indeed there was a bicycle next to her. A complete conspiracy. She was worried if my wife came with me, she would have to bring the bicycle, so she decided to bring it with her. I thought and laughed hard when I saw her. She smiled back at me. Mischievous stars of desire lit up in her eyes. Before I could say hello, she dragged me deep into the park, where there were many trees and few people. And there she played and did whatever she wanted. So much for being a 50-year-old woman. but acting like an insatiable athlete. That's how we live, with my mother-in-law is not bored. I'm just shocked by her various games.